I will introduce my four speakers. Thank you. Jamila Ubaid is a Yemeni journalist based in Germany, and she has studied economy. She worked for different platforms in Yemen and also in Germany. Abbas Al-Urwa, adjunct professor at the Faculty of Medicine, founding director of Cordoba Peace Institute, Geneva, and member of the board of Al-Karama of Human Rights, also in Geneva. Mohammed Al-Misfer, professor of political science. He worked in the diplomatic corps at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the Consulate General in Pakistan, and the embassy in London, and finally at the United Nations in New York. And Frank Mermier? Okay. Is an anthropologist, senior researcher at the French Center for National Research. He is currently a member of the French Institute of Anatolian Studies in Istanbul. His research focuses on Yemeni society, urban societies, and cultural production in the Arab world. So, building on what Mrs. Tawakkol Karman said this morning, this is not an invitation to a public depression. On the contrary, it's an anticipatory practice, a call for hope for the not yet post-war Yemen, post-war for the whole Yemen that we all know, and not for only a part of it. Therefore, the reconstruction that we will be discussing here in this session is not only about the physical or economic rebuilding of post-war Yemen, but more about also the politics of it, reconstruction and transitional justice. As we all know, Yemen that we have known for almost 25 years doesn't really exist as such anymore. How would this affect the process of reconstruction? When should reconstruction start? Should we wait until the war is over? Should we begin immediately, being aware that the United Nations declared Yemen as the site of world's worst humanitarian crisis 3 years ago? And the United Nations Development Program publishes a report in September 2019 that said if the war continues, Yemen will become the poorest country in the world, with 79% of the population living below poverty, and 65% in extreme poverty by 2022. So, we will touch upon precedent examples of reconstruction, the role of the local and external actors in the reconstruction process, the props and the risks, and finally, we will focus on war memories. After the panelists finished their talk, we will open the space for collective questions. So please write down your comments and your questions, and we will have an opportunity to ask them to the panelists after they finish their talk. I will start with the first and the only panelist woman today, Mrs. Jamila. Discussions of reconstructions often begin with the economic needs, assessment, and templates derived from international best practices. What perceptions do you think are appropriate for reconstruction in post-war Yemen concerning the economy? As we all know, a post-war period marks the termination of conflict entirely. In Yemen, should people wait until that moment of post-war? So, the stage is all yours.
Thank you, Saba, for giving me the opportunity. The economic language is complex and dry, so I will try to formulate my perception about the reconstruction in Yemen in a simple way, and I hope that it will be good enough in the 10 minutes that I have. I would like to say, to get development, we don't need money, but we need good reputation. Good reputation of any country comes within the framework of political stability, monetary stability, and it requires a firm policy and a strong internal decision that is not influenced by foreign influences. In addition to have good reconstruction, we need to be free of the influence of foreign influence. I think this has been discussed today already, and it is very important to reiterate that our relations with the neighboring region or countries is going in the opposite direction. Our state is within the Gulf states, and we are considered as a market for Saudi Arabia, not as a consumer market for the Saudi and Emirati products, but we are also a place where we have the industry of manpower that doesn't only give them the labor they need, but we also pay them taxes and revenues. It is an opposite image. Saudi Arabia is using Yemen to settle its accounts with other countries. They launched a war against Yemen, and it holds the government captive in Saudi Arabia, and Saudi Arabia imposes its own agenda. In this context, I can say that we don't need efforts of reconstruction from Saudi Arabia or UAE. We don't need that money to genuinely reconstruct our country to achieve the development that we need. We don't need the International Monetary Fund or the World Bank. We don't need a conference of a donors conference to give us the money, conditioned money in phases. We need to have monetary stability and the trust to impose our own monetary policies that are agreed upon by the people. We don't need development programs that are subject to the international programs or the UN programs or under the principle of globalization. I mean, we can impose our own needs and implement them on the ground. The Yemenis themselves can propose these policies and implement them on the ground. Not only that, we also need to have monitoring. I mean, societal monitoring on the implementation on the ground. This requires complete transparency, and any citizen has the right to access to information and to hold any official accountable in the country during the reconstruction phase. It is very important within the monitoring period to have a strong journalism. I mean, the officials are bound to provide information to journalism in any topic and to make interviews, because journalism play an important role in monitoring and delivering or communicating information to citizens in these issues. The remaining issue is who is going to pay the bill of reconstruction. We can pay the bill of reconstruction through a number of ideas. The first one is that when we have good reputation, monetary stability, respect for public property, and a good and strong infrastructure and institutional structure, we can draw investments. So only when we have, only if we have a trust in the international market, we can get money. The Arab coalition, United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia must pay money for reconstruction, and as well as moral and material compensation for the destruction and for the victims for those who were harmed by and affected by the war. We must not go to beg for money in conferences. We are the owners of the rights, but unfortunately, the principles are reversed in the community that we are, or in the society we're living in. We can impose our own agenda in the regional dynamics to have a pragmatic geopolitical relation with the other countries, and to have a peer relation with the others. When Qatar was under the economic embargo, they started or established relations with Iran, for example. So what we need from the neighboring countries and from the countries of the Arab coalition countries, we can boycott them, we can stop the relations with them. And all the issues, all the things that were made before the war, or any agreements that were signed by the Houthis or during the war, they have no legal status. They don't have any. They are not imposed on the people. They were made for these countries to get certain interests or benefits. We need to be strong enough to impose our own agenda. I can also say that we need to abandon the UN efforts. We don't need them. And as an economist, I could say that any loans or grants, they come with accompanying financial and economic conditions that will make us suffer more and have reverse effects. Because if we get loans, so we are going to pay interest on them, and these loans or grants, whether they're coming from international financial institutions or others, they are invested in places that are not useful or effective for our local economy. Another example, which is the German economic miracle. Why did I use this? Because after World War II, Germany was destroyed, surrounded politically and militarily. It was occupied and divided. Germany was divided, and German territory was taken. Germany didn't receive money from any country, although the Marshall Plan gave several countries in Europe several grants, but it gave Germany only loans that should be paid with interest later. Germany could have or should have paid the. It was imposed. It was forced to pay the bill of World War II to the forces of the Allies. Despite all of the difficulties the German people was under, through this solidarity of the Germans, with a good role of women, where they were able to have a good development in Germany, based on the principles of the respect of individual freedom, societal liberty, and solidarity within society. The German economy was able to build on their self resources. They didn't want to. They managed not to lose their reputation in the market, and Germany wanted to be the motor of the economy in Europe, and they were able to do so. We are not so different from the Germans. We Yemenis can do this and can achieve all of these goals during this phase of war and in the post-war Yemen. Here I can say that the reconstruction plans that are the fake ones that are being marketed here and there under the supervision of Yemen, of Saudi Arabia, and United Arab Emirates and other international institutions, they are not successful ones, and we don't need these loans to be provided to Yemen. Thank you very much.
From here, we move to Dr. Abbas. How does transitional justice stand in the broader process of conflict transformation, and what are the pillars of transitional justice and the pitfalls that could be encountered when designing a program of national reconciliation in post-war Yemen?
Thank you, Sava, for your kind introduction. Thanks to the foundation for offering this opportunity. And special thanks to Mrs. Tawakkol for her beautiful speech, opening speech this morning. It was really moving and very rich. Allow me then to switch to Arabic because the majority here in the room are Arabic speakers. أيها السادة والسيدات.
Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. We're still in the afternoon, right? Or is it evening? Good time then. I was requested to speak about transitional justice. And its role to end the violent disputes in Yemen. I would like to clarify something, that transitional justice is not tasked to dispute or resolve the dispute or the conflict. When we talk about transitional justice, there is an aspect of justice, but what is not tackled sometimes by people who work in this field is that it is not only about about issues related to rights and laws, but there are a number of procedures. So let's define what we are talking about. Transitional justice is a number of measures, legal, as well as political, social, cultural, economic measures, as well as structures that allow to reach national reconciliations. That's how it is defined by the jurisprudent experts in conflict resolution. The resolution aims to solve or to address the psychological and social impacts of the violence. This is called the negative or shortcoming reconciliation. The genuine reconciliation is to reach an opportunity for coexistence and building a state together, which is a perception of the coexistence and living together in the future. This is the genuine or the positive reconciliation. When societies go through transition, people running these periods or in charge of these periods find a lot of challenges because, as I said, reconciliation tackles the heritage of the past. But in a transition, we are not only concerned in solving or addressing the heritage of the past, but we also want to meet the needs of the present time. So any authority that wants to be in charge or that is in charge of the transition, they need to see how the community will survive. So they need to produce and to make use of the resources. So there are demands for the future and there are demands for the present time. The future responsibilities are related to building institutions and building the state of the rule of law and good governance. All of this make the processes of reconciliation, including transitional justice, very challenging. This is not to scare the dear brothers and sisters in Yemen. This is only to learn from the past lessons of the past that a number of countries in the Arab world, in Latin America and in Europe has gone through. And I can give you examples. For example, in Tunisia, for example, the Dignity and the Truth Commission, and in Morocco there was the Reconciliation and the Truth Commission, and in Algeria there was the National Reconciliation and Peace Charter. So the challenge is huge. The second challenge in transitional justice is or has to do with the mediation within community. Rather than a purely human rights logic. Most of you are working in human rights or human rights defenders. So the field of human rights has a different logic, including advocacy, campaigns, denunciation, atrocities, etc. But the logic of transitional justice has a different logic. It takes into consideration human rights, because we cannot imagine reconciliation or transitional justice that is in conflict with the law of the international law of the human rights, especially when it comes to the atrocities and abuses. But we, at the same time, we are talking about mediation between the different parties within the community. And when we are talking about such a context, we find ourselves talking with people who are involved in perpetrating crimes. So there are levels of the crimes perpetrated, and it is necessary, if we want to reach national reconciliation, to include everybody, including those who are involved in the crimes. So transitional justice is called or labeled that it doesn't aim only to address the rights of the victims, but also it addresses the rights of the perpetrators and the rights of the community at large. The national reconciliation during the dispute or a violent conflict, things come in the third phase, which means after we end the conflict or reach a cessation of hostilities or a ceasefire, or what is called the conflict settlement. The second phase is the conflict resolution, or addressing the root causes of the conflict. Then the third phase is reconciliation. So we have these three phases. The sequence is very important in this regard. So we can work on these three phases without any problem. We can work on them in parallel, but there's something that must be avoided, which is overlooking the second phase, which is the conflict resolution, which means addressing the root causes of the conflict. There are examples in the world. For example, in Algeria, a law was passed for national reconciliation, but without addressing the root causes. That's why we see since 2005, it's been 15 years now since then, the Charter of National Reconciliation didn't achieve anything, and you see what is the movement and the dynamic that is taking place in Algeria now. Very quickly, or briefly, because I'm losing time, national reconciliation must be based on several pillars. Four of them are very important, which are the truth, the memory, justice, and amnesty. Of course, truth is very important for the victims and the community at large. Everybody needs to know who did what and who is responsible for what has been perpetrated. This is a right for the victims and the community at large. There are examples like the examples of reconciliation, like the Moroccan example. They achieved something for reaching the truth, but it was not complete. When the truth commissions were wanted to mention what happened to them, they told victims to say that, but without mentioning who did that to them. This is the Moroccan example. The Algerian example didn't give the chance for the victims to learn the truth. Then we have the imperative of the memory, because this allows the community not to repeat the violence or the conflict. Then we have justice, and justice here is a restorative justice, not a revengeful justice, and it has to do to serve the entire community. Then we have the amnesty, because amnesty mitigates the dryness of justice or the roughness of justice. In terms of amnesty, there are, of course, individual rights and public rights. For the public rights, the entity that is responsible for the reconciliation can issue a general amnesty policy for the perpetrators in the general rights. But in terms of the individual or personal rights, there is no authority that can provide or offer amnesty for the crimes against individuals or for the personal rights. But what it can do is to encourage individuals to forgive for their personal rights, and this we have a wide range of points or in our religion and in our culture that encourage that issue. For example, in Algeria, there was something about the rights of the kidnapped people. Those are suffering from this issue because there was amnesty for all the perpetrators, and they put those victims in a very awkward position. That's enough for me, and thank you for listening to me.
And now we move to Professor Muhammad. In an interview, TV interview with you in 2015 with الحرب channel, if you remember, you mentioned that only 3 countries from GCC, or Gulf Cooperation Council, that are really involved in the war against Yemen. Building on that, do you think that they are the most responsible for reconstruction in Yemen? And what is the role of the region, particularly GCC, Iran, in Yemen reconstruction, alongside, of course, US and UK, or the international community?
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم ابتداءً.
In the name of God, the most merciful, the most beneficious, first of all, I would like to extend special thanks and great thanks to the organizers and the inviters of this conference, most prominent of them, Miss Tawakkol Karman, this woman who appeared in Yemen and then went on to be granted the Nobel Peace Prize for her role in the popular revolution of Yemen that toppled one of the pillars of despotism in the Arab world at that time. Extended thanks to her, of course, because she's the only Yemen woman amongst the Yemeni people who had a foundation. She's not a businessman or woman. She is not one of the commercial figures. It is something that she's credited for. Thanks also are extended to another great lady. Her name is Misk, and this name is really indicative of her personality, which is the perfume of musk. And I address her with a different name totally. I will not use it now, so I do not have her lose this name of Misk, translating into English into musk, perfume. She kept inviting me and chasing me up until I have been here. Thank you very much, Misk, and thank you very much, Tawakkol. I will go out of context for a little bit, if I may, my lady. Commenting on this, I've heard that Ali Abdullah Saleh has invaded the south. I have also heard in that interview that he destroyed the South Army. I think that that term needs to be fixed. That happened for unity, and unity should be established. There was no unity that took place with reconciliation. For example, the American, the German, the Italian, and even the Saudi unity, all of them took place based on violence. This is why I say we should not use this term. The Southern Army, it's not an army of the South, it is an army of the Yemeni state. Therefore, when they rebel, they should be brought back to the real position. It is true that the regime committed great crimes, most prominent of which not establishing foundations for this state for which Ali Abdullah Saleh has ruled with dictatorship for decades, and this is what she should be responsible for, held responsible for, and accountable for. I think that we have to be patient before using some terminology. Let me go back to our topic of the day. I have listened, and I'm still listening to Yemen legitimacy. I don't know whether this is being broadcasted live, and I am not hesitant to say that legitimacy is confiscated, is kidnapped. They cannot express their opinion or freedom because they don't have their free will. Any kidnapped person cannot go out of the context set for him by the kidnapper. Therefore, if we say that legitimacy did not provide anything, but what did these national Yemeni forces provide instead of the legitimate authority? What others have provided in order to save Yemen from the disaster it fell under? It brought occupational powers from the region by the neighbors, and it was subject to the despotism of the neighbors. So the question is, what did the Yemeni generations, the Yemeni youth, including yourselves, in exile? What did it do for Yemen in exile, and what did people in Yemen do until now? Yemeni symbolic figures are still conflicting over the legitimacy of the legitimate authority. What did those who are based in Istanbul, Cairo, Malaysia, or wherever they are, what did they do? They are demanded to work. I have heard one of our colleagues that there should be a movement towards a national unity government, a party in exile, or a unity government that is inclusive of everybody. I would like to tell our brothers in the south of Yemen, what do you want? You fought patriotic movements, communism movements, liberal movements, and other movements. What did you do? You did nothing. The Yemen unity for 30 to 40 years made something. They have committed crimes, and they will be held accountable for that, no doubt. Now we have many names of them. The Hadramaut Comprehensive Reference Conference, etc. We have a big list of these factions. In the north, the Houthis said they are in unity, but you are in the south, divided. With this background, what do you want? Isn't unity better than a bad friend? Isn't unity better than bad options and alternatives? Yemen has no future from now until doomsday without unity, the unity of its people, men, sons, education, healthcare, strife. Yemen extends from the Far Eastern Indonesia to Southeast Asia, India, and the GCC area. Half of the tradesmen in Saudi come from Yemen, and it extends to the UK, US. On those able to build a happy Yemen, wisdom is Yemeni, mindfulness is Yemeni, and we're still saying reconciliation, terminology, etc. If we fight all of these parties of liberals, unity defenders, etc., whom do we defend? For time purposes, I will go back to the GCC and the Yemeni street. Isn't that this question? GCC is going through a crisis today. It is kidnapped. It is disintegrated. It's not united. You think it is united because the name is the Gulf Cooperation Council, but it is the Council of Defeat now. God gave it the biggest wealth on earth, petrol and gas, a strategic location. People were competing for that around the world. And the importance of the Gulf started in 305 years before Christ. Alexander the Great was one of the first people to anticipate the importance, the strategic importance of that. He said that he doesn't feel safe without having a presence in the GCC. He defeated the Persians, and then he opened the appetite of the Europeans today to compete on having control there. We say that he could have been a supporter of Yemen, but it was divided, and it started to be a destroying force, a dividing force that divides the unity of Yemen, the men of Yemen, the people of Yemen, and the resources of Yemen. The GCC could have been a leader, not only for the peninsula and for Yemen. I have demanded since the 80s at its birth. I told them it will not be sustainable as long as Yemen and Iraq are not part of it. Many words have been said about me, but this is my opinion, and I express it very loudly wherever I am. The Americans have sucked. They milked it. They ate it. They've sucked it dry. I think that they will come to finish the rest. If Trump went back to governing, it will finish off the sovereign funds and we are looking for the revival of Yemen on all aspects, and the same for the Arab world and for the GCC Council. And thank you very much for taking so much time.
In our session, based on what we have heard in this session and also in the previous sessions, Moreover, as an anthropologist yourself who worked closely with Yemenis, how do you think the memories of war could affect the process of transitional justice and reconstruction? And also, if you could elaborate on what I've asked you earlier, in area where people can have faster access to knowledge through the internet, despite it's very slow in Yemen, do you think that there is any possibility for alternative narratives as a method of transitional justice? And the stage is yours.
Thank you very much. أولاً أود أن أتوجه جزيل شكري إلى مؤسسة توكل.
First of all, I would like to extend special thanks to the Tawakkol Karman Foundation and to the chairman of the foundation, Ms. Tawakkol Karman. And I would like to extend thanks to Mrs. Misk Al-Junaid. I will change the language of address because I prepared my presentation in English.
Memory of previous wars and political violence play an important role in political mobilization and positioning. We all know that the war in Yemen has led to the emergence of new armed factions and has aggravated the phenomenon of regional political centers, particularly as a result of direct interference by regional powers, threatening the very integrity of Yemen. Aggravating the fragmented political landscape, some of these regional poles have become the focus on internal rivalries for their control, as in Aden, Taiz, Mahra, Socotra, and Taiz, and have become incubators of future wars. As a result of that, another aspect which must be taken into consideration is the moral distance which was established between the different regions of Yemen because of the enduring conflict which has isolated parts of the country from each other. This isolation has been aggravated by the tendency of some political powers to exclude those located beyond what they considered as their borders in order to achieve their political domination. The dynamics of war have also resulted in extreme fragmentation of the Yemeni public sphere and of the components of the civil society. The territorial, regional, and political fragmentation which have emerged from conflictual relationships rely also on the memory of previous wars, 62, 86, 94, 2004 till 2010. The current war has also led to many internal wars in Sana'a, Taiz, and Aden. Thus, the question of dealing with these war memories will be an important challenge for the post-war period, and it is directly related to the topic of national reconstruction and transitional justice. If the amnesty of the warlords in Yemen is part of a general agreement to end the conflict, there is a risk that it will impose this kind of forced amnesia through which the vivid memory of war might prevent the steady progress of the social and political reconstruction processes. After 5 years of war, we can already observe that the voices of the victims are not heard, are rarely recorded, and are concealed by political propaganda and the erratic numbers of casualties given by international organizations. Post-war Yemen will probably face a territorial and community fragmentation of war memory because war experiences differ from one region to another. It will be an important challenge to overcome the confrontation of conflicting memories. In numerous cases, what has been labeled as the competition of victims has often led to a war of memories. It is known that the prioritization of victims and memories depends on the strength of the institutions that give them official status and recognition. An important aspect of the national reconstruction process will concern the mechanism to be implemented to overcome the compartmentalization of suffering and the intolerance that qualifies partisan and community memories. How to set up a forgiveness policy, a forgiveness that only victims can offer in order to legitimize a right to forget that is an integral part of any construction of memory. I can here refer to the famous lecture of the French historian Ernest Renan in 1882. It was called What is a Nation?, who stated that a nation is based as much on what the people jointly remember, on shared memory, and on what they forget, such as inter-religious killings in the case of France. Preparing the reconstruction and the transitional justice processes require that the research for historical truth needs to be appropriated by the population through the civil use of history. As it is usual in internal wars, even if they have a regional dimension, as in Yemen, the victims of the other camp are not considered as innocents, as if the only real victims are those who belong to one camp rather than another. Because the internal enemy is perceived as an extension of the external enemy. Their status as victim is denied. In the Yemeni context that is marked by the deterioration of cultural infrastructures, particularly in the field of publishing and the press, and the dispersal of a large part of the cultural elite, not to mention the censorship that takes place within the country, an urgent task is to encourage the reconstitution of the Yemeni cultural field and public sphere. It appears that post-war national reconstruction and transitional justice processes require not only the documentation of human rights violations and war crimes, as it has been already undertaken, but also the establishment of a long-term initiative to collect war testimonies in the different regions of Yemen by Yemeni social science students who will be trained in the methods of collecting and using oral sources. In this respect, we must praise the courageous work of collecting testimonies of war victims, which has been undertaken by Ms. Bushra al-Makhtari in her book, ماذا تركت وراك أصوات من بلاد الحرب المنسية, What You Left Behind, Voices from the Country of the Forgotten War. But as we know, the book market has largely disappeared in Yemen, and Yemeni publications are nowadays accessible only through internet. It would be highly recommended that the project of collecting memories accompanies the creation of a virtual Yemeni database that includes contemporary cultural production. These projects will thus be connected to the objective of increasing the quality and the scope of knowledge production in Yemen, and the unveiling of social, cultural, economic, and political problems through social sciences. As it has been stated by the French sociologist Bernard Lahire, sociology helps to face the cruel reality of things in order to be able to think rationally about how to act against the unequal state of things. Furthermore, public policy needs to be elaborated in order to lead to the official recognition of the different voices which deal with war memories. It will concern the writing of a unified history textbook, the definition and selection of heritage markers, particularly through people's participation of the inhabitants in expressing their memory and belonging within the planning process during the phase of reconstruction. The reconstruction process will play an important role in the recognition of all war victims by associating local communities in both the urban and rural areas in the planning process in order to achieve a kind of therapeutic planning in the sense that has been defined by Leonie Sandercock, I quote, creating safe spaces and to enable people in the situations of conflict to express their fears, desires, and hopes without being threatened if they speak out. As I have already mentioned, it is also important to take into consideration the fact that the war in Yemen is an extremely localized conflict and that the experience of war is different from one region to another. Moreover, the reconstruction process will require to be decentralized in order to reflect the various war conditions and experiences of local communities. To avoid precedent mistakes concerning architectural and urban reconstruction, here I will mention the example of the reconstruction of downtown Beirut, which has been isolated from the rest of the city. It will be of crucial importance to reconcile the restoration of local heritage with the social, economic, and political imperatives of reconstruction. Thank you.
Thank you. So now, a lot of questions, but I think I'll give the opportunity for the audience because I know there are a lot of people who have a lot of questions. So now we will open the space for you, but please, please, I know you have a lot of questions, but if your question is built on the previous sessions, keep it for after the session. You can meet one of the panelists outside while we're having lunch or while we're having a drink. But for now, please focus on this session and articulate your question because we don't have enough time. And I'm going to be a bit biased, and I will start with a woman. Women, do you have questions?
Il y a une là-bas.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم.
War will end for sure. That's something we know for sure. All the generation that today knows that there will be no custody over Yemen, and we know that since back in history that Yemen was a graveyard for all the occupiers who wanted to build it. So how about those who want to destroy it? For sure it will be a graveyard for them. In terms of the transitional justice, the most important factor in Yemen now, which is the women group, women are not present in the decisions of the state, whether the legitimacy government or the United Nations. We hear a lot about empowering women and a lot of slogans, but in practice there is nothing. Yemeni women now are not the same women that were in the past. Now they are doing things that they were not prepared for in the past. Tens of thousands of Yemeni women now are the breadwinners of their own households after the killing or the kidnapping of their sons and husbands in the war. A lot of males are not in the household. They are either kidnapped or they are outside, or they are jobless now, and they are controlling women the same way they used to, although the woman is the breadwinner right now. This will have an impact that will last for a long time into the future. I think we need the interest of international organizations, not local ones, to take care of the displaced disabled persons, because we have large numbers of them and women are taking care of them, and we see a lot of families that are holding that burden. So we need to qualify them scientifically, provide them with vocational training, and to give them projects to help their families and help women in specific who are taking care of them. Thank you very much.
Okay, so I'll go this way. I told you I'll be biased today. But please, in short.
اوكي. سؤالي للأستاذة جميلة عبيد.
My question is to Ms. Jamila Abeid. You mentioned 2 points about the economy, good reputation and monetary stability. The question is, in the context of the state that we have now, how can we achieve this state? Another question to Mr. Abdullah Al-Misfer. In your opinion, do you think that the Yemeni situation can be better within the presence of the current Gulf states, or do we need something else?
We don't have time and we have a lot of people to ask.
Mr. Frank.
Okay.
Which is, he has mentioned about the fragmentation in the victims' memories. So, how to solve this problem?
Would you please repeat the question?
The fragmentation in the victim's memory. Yeah. That's it. Thank you.
Okay, you can answer it now. You can answer the question.
Thank you very much for your question. What I wanted to say is that the question of the victims depends on the strength of the institutions which recognize these persons as victims. So what we have seen in the previous experiences, that some of the victims of civil conflicts or civil wars or internal wars, some of the victims are not recognized because they are not the legitimate victims. As for example, my talk of today was based not only on my experience in Yemen, but also on my experience in Lebanon. I co-edited a book on war memories in Lebanon between 75 and 90. It's a collective research program which has been achieved in a book. And what we discovered that, for example, the victim of one camp were not recognized by the other camp as victims. It is as if the victims are not innocent. They belong to the camp. So that will be very important in the phase of reconstruction, that all the victims must be recognized as at the national scene, and for that is not only a moral injunction to recognize the victim, but it must go through the creation of institutions, through the transitional process, through the transitional justice process, which will recognize all the victims of the different camps as victims. And so it's very important, perhaps now, to begin, not only to wait to the end of the war, but now to begin to build perhaps this database of collecting memories, of collecting facts about the war in Yemen in the different regions, in order to recognize after the status of victims to all the victims of Yemen.
Yeah, and building on what the professor said, also, I don't think it's the responsibility of one organization or for a foundation to do this, but I think all of us together, we have to write about our memories on war and not just to keep it for later. And other questions?
أرد على سؤال. هو سألني سؤال.
Sorry, yes, sorry.
الأخ الذي سألني عن كيف ممكن
She asked me how can we have good reputation in the regional and international markets, and how can we make monetary reforms to lead to stability in the currency exchange. There are a number of economic policies that are well known, but personally, I think it has to do with the society. The societal awareness is very important. So when we have our country and we have a goal that when we are present in the international community, we need to have weight. We need to have an effective state that can make its own decisions and implement them without any foreign caretaker, which means that this country or this state is able to implement its own decisions. The monetary stability or the stability in the currency exchange is the same meaning. They have the same meaning. So the local currency is the purchase value or our the purchase value of the trade exchanges. So, for example, in the governmental media, for example, we can say that we protect private ownership or property and the individual rights or liberty. It means that any investment that will take place in Yemen, it will be protected under the international law and the local law, that they will not be impacted by corruption or monopoly. When we have an infrastructure that can be improved, institutional in structures like trade unions, like associations, that will not allow any, when we have officials that will not allow black markets to grow, whether currency markets or weapon markets, for example, as well as supporting the local industries and to have a good role in the economic cycle. All of these policies will get us there.
We do have time. So how many? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. 6, 7, 8. Okay, so I will start from there, the lady over there, yes. And then I will go back to the one that, yes, you.
مرحبا.
If reconciliation, conflict resolution took place and the war ended with a federal system that guarantees the rights of people, what is the role of the international community to consolidate this stability? And are there any guarantees, the potential guarantees of suggested for the stability of peace or not? هل سؤالك
وسؤال مختصر ملخص.
It covers the 3 sessions, and any panelist can answer this question. Reconciliation usually takes place between leadership, military and political leadership. Reform takes place between leaders, but here we talk about the elites, for example, cultural scientists, religious leaders, women organizations, etc. Reconciliation takes place on the level of the grassroots. We cannot have reconciliation on higher levels of the structure. The only guarantor is the people. Here, I would like to thank the foundation for organizing or holding an event to help the communities to resolve the conflicts and not wait international bodies or any other bodies who are not doing anything for the conflict to be resolved. Unfortunately, the United Nations didn't give any results in different examples, and we see that in Yemen for several years now. The UN mechanism couldn't achieve what the Yemeni people want because of international and regional interventions that have been mentioned already. So the Yemeni people and the community in general must take into on its shoulders starting a track for the national reconciliation. As of now, as the colleague before me said, he talked about the memory. For example, talking about the memory, we need to start with it right now to develop a data base or a data bank for the human rights violations, etc., etc. The most important thing is that it should be a collective, inclusive track. If it's not inclusive for all groups, all movements in the community, all trends, it will fall short of success. In terms of the question about women, by nature, if women are excluded from the reconciliation track, then it will be a factor for the failure of the reconciliation. And women here are not referred to as victims, but as an actor or a factor for peace. Hello, thanks for the foundation for this meeting. A question about transitional justice. How can we achieve a transitional justice whereas all parties in Yemen perpetrated the human rights violations, regardless of the percentages of that? Do you think that we need to reach a political solution and reconciliation amongst all parties? Then we reach the transitional justice mechanisms, including truth and the collective memory. This process is based on consensus. No one party can impose it on the others. Why did I say ending the war, resolving the conflict, and then reconciliation? Because when we do the reform or addressing the root causes of the conflict between the parties, this will lead to a consensus on diagnosing the causes and trying to devise solutions. Encouraging all parties to find solutions. This will give momentum for the reconciliation later. Thank you.
محمد أنا ولا محمد هو؟
أنت خلصنا.
أنا كمان
You
محمد.
choose.
تمام عن إذنك يا محمد.
اختاروا واحد منكم بس حيطلع.
لا لا
لدي سؤال على أي حال. أولا شكرا.
Thanks for all the panelists. I have a question. Dr. Abbas spoke about transitional justice. I want to mention the experience of Yemenis in terms of amnesty. We have a bad example or experience in terms of amnesty when the impunity was given or immunity was given to the former regime, and this immunity was a door or a gate for the practice of violence in Yemen, unfortunately. So how can we manage between the amnesty and the pillars of transitional justice? I think there is a problem, maybe because there was a confusion between the private rights and the public rights, or personal rights and public rights, and that's the problem of amnesty, because there was a general amnesty regardless of the rights violated. But I think it is most likely that the problem of the example that you have given is that there was reconciliation that came before the conflict resolution. That's why it wasn't successful, because overlooking because the root causes of the political conflict were still there. There is also difference between the transitional justice and criminal justice. The immunity that Ali Abdullah Saleh received, they were beyond the crimes that he perpetrated, and that was the problem.
So, بسرعة.
The audience are Arab, so I hope you can speak Arabic with us.
Go ahead.
ملاحظتي على الدكتور القدير محمد
Mr. Al-Musfir, thank you very much for your position towards the Arab Spring and our rights to have a democratic state. You mentioned something about invading the south and to end the army there. What happened there wasn't, there was a coup against the joint arrangements for the court, and this was what you mentioned. The idea of the unity started in the south, and they conceded a lot of things for the sake of unity, including the presidency and the government. But there was a coup against this, these concessions. So what happened, or the separation in the south, is not a conflict or a counter unity. Now, a question is why the United Arab Emirates and the Saudi Arabia are working for the disintegrating Yemen, and for whom benefit will that feed into? If I understood your question well, why some Gulf countries are disintegrating Yemen or dividing Yemen, right? Unfortunately, there are Yemeni businessmen who are working on dividing Yemen, and they extended their hands to these countries. So now they are looking for having positions, political positions, or leading positions. That's why they sold their country for money. And businessmen can sell anything for their gains. But at the end of the day, selling their country is a loss for them, because they lost their homeland, their people, and their territory. The Gulf countries also will lose through the division of Yemen, because Yemen is a national credit in terms of the mines, the culture, the workforce, and the status. And in the Gulf region, it was very important, whether in terms of the security of the Gulf or the industry. But unfortunately, because of the crises in the Gulf, and some countries have a lot of money, now we started to export or import workforce from foreign countries, and I believe this is leading to a default in the or a gap in the workforce and the people, because the Gulf are now very distant from us. And I believe the main reason for this is the Yemeni businessmen who are trading with their countries for the sake of positions and for the sake of personal and individual gains, and now they are spread around different Gulf capitals, and they are one of the reasons for this situation in Yemen.
Time, and if we couldn't have time, you can ask the questions during the lunch or during the drinks. So, yes.
السلام عليكم. أولاً
Peace be upon you. I am a free Yemeni. I'm not affiliated to any entity or any party in Yemen. My question is, what after war there will be peace, and peace starts from within. A war destroyed Yemeni people because it is not over yet. The first priority after war is rebuilding people before rebuilding the buildings. Mr. Mohammed Al-Musfir asked a question. What did the political parties or forces provided in these issues? And he received a lot of applause for the honesty of his message. If the legitimacy government or the legitimate group, which is fragile and it's not kidnapped because it surrendered itself to others. What we have seen from the political forces so far are skirmishes that led to more conflict and more division within the community in a time that the Yemenis need to be unified. The question is, what do political powers need to provide or offer at such a time? Thank you. Do you mean the Yemeni powers or others? I'm asking a question. What do the Yemeni powers, Yemeni political powers are offering? I believe the Yemeni political parties must put aside all of their political agendas and political differences to go back and put the agenda of the Yemeni nation on top of its priority, that Yemen receives its power from within, not from outside. Yemen was a strength all over history, and it defeated all the invaders all over history, and it will do so. It will defeat the enemies that are under the guise of friends. And it will defeat the businessmen who are selling their homeland for their financial benefit. They will have no future. But I think that the Yemeni people, the Yemeni leadership, and the young people who are living in the diaspora right now, in the Arab world, we had only Palestinian refugees. Now we have Iraqi refugees, Syrian refugees, Yemeni refugees, etc., etc. I believe those people who are living in the diaspora have responsibility to learn, to have the knowledge in order to rebuild their countries in the future and in the foreseeable future, not so long from now, hopefully.
يوصلوا للضيوف. خلونا اليوم
Media people can reach the speakers anytime. So now let's give the time for the students and other young people. I would like to thank the Tawakkol Karman Foundation for this event. I have a question for Ms. Jamila and Mr. Mohammed Al-Misfir. Saudi Arabia and UAE, you said that they are obliged to pay compensations. To rebuild Yemen, they need to be outside, but how can we force them to pay the bill of reconstruction? The second question is for Ms. Mohammed Al-Misfir. Because there is a conflict in the questions, because Our problem now is that Saudi Arabia and UAE, we want them to leave Yemen, whereas another opinion say that they are obliged to pay the bill of reconstruction. So how can we speak about these 2 points together? I need to hear an explanation. Thank you.
بسيط لما واحد يصدم سيارة ولا يعور جاهل بالشارع يدفع هو
When somebody crashes or steps over somebody in the street, they would pay. In an accident, the person who causes that accident pays the cost and the expenditures for the maintenance and the injuries. Civil society organizations, the community, the society, the people will submit an invoice. I think that there will be legal lawsuits that detail why all of the coalition countries who bombed the Yemen must pay. They have to pay us that without any condition. Just